There you go, recording in the cloud. Wow, let's never said that before.
I know, that's new. That took me by surprise when I heard that the first time.
This is the first time it didn't even do that last night. Recording in process. Wow, that's, I don't know if that's cool or not, but it was different. So anyways.
Better to know, I guess.
Right. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us here at a Free Thinkers Corner for our last in this week's part of the series. But of course, we have 4 more coming up next week. But tonight, we're speaking with author of the Lizzy Ballard thrillers, the Kinnear suspense novels, and the Kinnear suspense shorts, Matty Dalrymple. Dalrymple, is that saying it correct?
Dalrymple, yeah.
Dalrymple. Matty lives with her husband and 3 dogs in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and enjoys vacationing on Mount Desert Island in Maine and Sedona, Arizona. And these locations provide the setting of her work. The Iron Ring, which came out in 2019, is the 3rd installment in the Lizzy Ballard series. And A Furnace for Your Foe is the latest in the Anne Kinnear series, which came out just this past April. Yes. And her books are available through bookshop.org. You can give us a call. You probably get it off her website as well. And Matty, thank you for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. So you spend time in Sedona, Arizona. What a lovely place. Yes, but I've never been there.
It is gorgeous. All the pictures you see of it, the actual place lives up to its reputation. So I had a lot of fun setting 2 of my Lizzy Ballard books there.
And you're so you spend a lot of time there. Your husband is a pilot. Do you fly there, or does he fly you there?
We have not done that yet. We would like to do that sometime. We have been as far as Wyoming in his plane. We're based outside Philadelphia, and he has flown us from this area to Wyoming. He's also flown us down to the Keys, but not quite as far as Sedona. So that's on our bucket list of things to do. Although I just got last year, I traded in my sedan and I got a Ford Transit Connect, which is kind of like a delivery vehicle. Like if you imagine the kind of vehicle that florists deliver their flowers in, that's a Ford Transit Connect. And I'm fitting it out as a little RV. And I'm hoping at some point that he can fly and I can meet him up there. I can drive the transit and have a little road trip too. So we have a couple of ways to get out to Sedona next time we want to go.
There you go. Do you ever think of taking a camper and just sort of camping your way across?
Yeah, I would be able to actually stay in to camp to an extent in my transit. There's a bed, and I can make coffee back there and things like that. Nice. A camper is a little more than I'd want to handle on the road, but you never know. Never say never.
I used to live out in San Diego, and there was I'm a pilot myself. I haven't flown in 20 years, but I do have my license, former air traffic controller as well. And but I did watch a video once of somebody taking off out of the airport that I worked at in San Diego, and did the whole flight from San Diego out to Sedona. And then they landed on top of one of the mesas there, one of the airports in Sedona. And it's just absolutely gorgeous out there. All the different colored rocks and the red rocks and stuff. And it's got a sort of a mystical aspect to it too, from what I hear from people, that there's some sort of spiritual or mystical thing. Is that what draws you to Sedona?
It's mainly the weather and the gorgeous scenery, and my husband's a big hiker, so he enjoys hiking. But we did take a hike one day. I'm not a hiker, I'm more a walker. My guideline is normally that if I have to use my hands, it's not a walk, and it's not probably an outing that I'm going to go on. But we went to one of our favorite restaurants, which is in the Talakepaki Village, which is kind of a shopping village in Sedona, which actually shows up in one of the books, makes an appearance in one of the books. And I had a glass of wine with lunch, and then we were going to go out to one of the trails near a vortex, which is, I think, what you're talking about with the mystical side of things. And I said, and it was like a pretty vigorous hike. Certainly it was vigorous for me, although it might not have been vigorous for him. And I said, you go ahead, you walk up to the top, and I'll walk, as far as I'm comfortable. And then I'll meet you on the way back, or I'll meet you back at the trailhead. And I just kept chugging along. And pretty soon I found myself at the top of the mesa, which is where this walk ended. And I thought, well, after a glass of wine at lunch, the vortex must have been helping me out to get me up to the top of the mesa.
you get to see any of those old Native American or ancient rock paintings and stuff? Is
Yeah.
those out there?
Yep. Yep. There are ones in that area. That's very interesting to see. Yeah. There's a ton of interesting stuff to see and do, and just hanging out. It's just such a lovely area. One of our favorite places is a inn right next to Oak Creek. Oak Creek Canyon is the canyon that cuts through um, the mountains there from the north into Sedona. And there's a place there where you can get a massage outdoors within
Mm,
this sort of enclosed on three sides building, so that you're all protected even when it's quite cold out. Because it does get quite cold in Sedona, because of the elevation.
right.
And I managed to work Oak Creek Canyon into the Iron Ring, which is the third Lizzy Ballard book, but it wasn't quite as relaxing and enjoyable for Lizzy as my experience has been.
Now you also, well, I was going to ask, so while you were sort of just walking and then found yourself up on top of the mesa, does your husband do rock climbing, like the rock face climbing and meet you up at the top?
He doesn't do rock face climbing yet. I wouldn't be at all surprised, but as an example, there are two trails that he regularly goes on Mount Desert Island, which is our other favorite place. So my books are largely set in the Philadelphia area, Chester County, which is just to the west of Philadelphia, which is where I live, in Sedona, which we've talked about, or Mount Desert Island, Maine, which is where Bar Harbor and Acadia are. And um, two of his favorite trails are called the Perpendicular Trail and the Precipice Trail. And so right there, those are trails I'm not going to be going on. And I'm just trying to find the acknowledgement in the book. Several people on MDI helped me out with getting the details right. And I said, for Wade Walton, my husband, um, for information on Mount Desert Island's more precipitous and perpendicular trails. So if it has one of those words in it, that's not really for me.
That's not for you.
No, it's not for me.
So if he ever does decide to do the rock face climbing, you're going to make sure that he has all the ropes and equipment, or you can just kind of let him go free.
It's totally up to him. I would think that he'd want to do all the ropes and equipment, but he's as you appreciate being a pilot, it's all about risk management and
Oh,
making sure that you're enjoying the fun while reducing the risk as much as possible.
right, right. So does he own? You said he owns his own plane. Is it? I show that he flies a Cherokee, Cessna 150, and a Stinson. Does he own all three? Do you own all
No,
three?
so he has a Piper Arrow 4 T-tail, I think.
Okay.
And at one time, I owned a 1946 Stinson 108, and I was taking. We would need way more than an hour and a half for me to relay the entire gruesome story of my piloting experience. But my husband was a pilot. We would go up, obviously, when we started dating, when we got married, and I thought it would be a good idea to take one of these pinch hitter courses, which, as you know, is just a course that's strictly focused on training a non-pilot passenger to land a plane safely in case of an emergency. So, but I think their secret desire is you get hooked, which I did. I took a couple of pinch hitter courses and I loved it, so I kept taking classes. And then I was getting close to soloing, and a plane at the airport where I was taking lessons, Brandywine Airport, right in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is the setting. Actually, the Brandywine Airport makes an appearance in one of the first two Anne Kinnear books. I'm kind of forgetting which one at the moment. And the plane got blown off the runway as it was landing. It got blown into the planes that were parked by along the flight line.
Yeah.
And fortunately, no one was hurt, amazingly enough. And even the pilot and the plane was not injured. But the plane that I had been taking my lessons in was totaled. But like the tail was pretty much sheared off the plane that I was flying in, which was a Piper Warrior, which was kind of like the baby version of my husband's Arrow. And so I thought, well, I know how companies work, it's going to take them forever to get another Warrior. So in the meantime, I'd gotten really fascinated with tailwheel airplanes, and it was not really possible to rent a tailwheel airplane for lessons. So I thought, I'm going to buy a tailwheel airplane because they're actually relatively inexpensive. It's sort of like, I don't know, buying a mid-range used car.
Mm.
And so I found a plane, this 1946 Stinson Voyager, which was just the best looking plane ever, and got it up here. It was in South Carolina, and had somebody fly it up. And then one thing led to another. An instructor was flying it, fortunately not with me in it, and ground looped it. There was a prop strike. There was like the period of time when engine was being overhauled. And so to make a very long story slightly shorter, I ended up discontinuing my flying lessons because it was right after my first book, Anne Kinnear first suspense novel, The Sense of Death, came out. I was working on The Sense of Reckoning, and I was also working a full-time job. And it would get to the weekends when I was scheduled to take a flying lesson, and it was just more stressful for me than it was enjoyable. And there was no reason I was doing it other than to have it be enjoyable. So I just thought, something had to go, and that was what it was. But the happy part of that was that plane ended up being purchased by a couple who lived quite nearby. And so I sort of felt like the person who adopts the herding dog, I live in a small apartment and I've adopted the herding dog, and now I don't know what to do with it, but I managed to pass it on to the people who live on the farm in the country. And, it was like, it was meant to be, to get the plane to the right owners,
Right.
because it did end up with the right people. But I have to say that even though my plane ownership experience wasn't completely bump free, I had a ton of fun. And it also gave me a lot of insight into planes and pilots and aviation and the whole environment, which then I was able to use in my third book, which is Falcon and the Owl, which has an aviation theme.
Nice. Yeah, well, I used to fly in Cherokee Warriors and Archers, and there was one in particular that I just loved flying. It was very comfortable. It flew very well. A lot of bells and whistles in it, and had taken my wife from San Diego up to Burbank, and then stayed up there and came back down. And then the next night, somebody broke into it. It was a club plane, but took it up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. It was foggier than foggy, and ended up crashing the plane.
Oh my
Even the
gosh.
passengers survived. The plane was just totaled, and I was so sad. It
Yeah.
was such a nice airplane. But
Oh man.
so what was it that did you ever fly into Bar Harbor?
I have not, but my husband has. So yeah, when we go up,
That's
normally he flies us into Bar Harbor Hancock County Airport, which is on the mainland right over Mount Desert Narrows from Mount Desert Island.
Yeah, there's a lot of expensive airplanes at that.
Yeah,
A lot
there
of
is
big
some
jets and
fancy hardware there, because it is like the playground of, Martha Stewart has a place there.
yeah.
The Rockefellers are, very active in the Mount Desert Island community. So yeah, there's like the little general aviation parking area with all the normal planes, and then there are the giant jets
Yeah.
by the
So
FBO.
so what was it that drew you to Mount Desert Park, both to go and visit and then as a setting for your books?
Well, my husband and I had our honeymoon there. I had never been there before. And so that was, let's see, almost 15 years ago now. And I just loved it. And part of it is that I really think that if my parent or my grandparent had vacationed there as a child and then went back, it would totally be recognizable to them. I mean, very little has changed over time. Many of the businesses there are the same businesses that have been there for generations and generations, and it's gorgeous. The Maine coast there, the Rocky Coast, and the canonical lighthouses. And usually we go in August, and so part of it is escaping the overly warm Philadelphia summers. But it's just beautiful and lots of history. And for my second book, the Sense of Reckoning, which is the first one that takes place on Mount Desert Island, I use some of the history of the island. There was a big fire back in 1947 that burned across a lot of the island, burned a lot of the parkland, and burned into Bar Harbor. and destroyed a lot of the cottages that on the Millionaire's Row. It's called Millionaire's Row, so that gives you an idea of what the cottages were like.
Yeah.
And and I even found the history of the island really fascinating.
Do you have any maps in your book of like some of the towns that are prominent in your book, even if it's just the inside book cover or something? Or
Yes. Did my husband pay you to ask me that question?
no.
Because
Actually, you're the first one that I've asked.
yeah, you probably can't see the detail of this, but this is a map of Mount Desert Island, and my editor told me that I should include a map because there were many references to Mount Desert Island's kind of shaped like a lobster claw. And so, you can think of it as like the Eastern Pincher and the Western Pincher, and then the body of water that runs up the middle is Soame Sound. And, if you want to get from the southern tip of one pincher to the southern tip of the other pincher, you have to go all the way up around Soame Sound. And my editor said, well, you should, it would be a lot nicer if you had a map in there that readers could reference. And I was concerned about copyright, finding a map that I could use that I wouldn't be interfering with copyright. So my husband made that map for me. So and you might be able to see in the background, I'll just lean over the map that's on the wall over there is actually Mount Desert Island. And then this map is Charleston, which is one of my other favorite places to go. We haven't been there for several years, but that is another great town, and one that I would love to set an Anne Kinnear suspense novel in, because it's just so atmospheric and historic and also very lovely.
So what got you to start writing in the first place, and then wanting to write mystery novels?
Well, I had always wanted to be a writer. My father was a writer. My father was a short story writer primarily, and he had some stories published in Collier's and Cosmopolitan back in the 50s. And then he sort of tried to turn his attention to novels. And I think it was just more of a short story, he had more of a short story gestalt than a novel gestalt. And of course, at the time, there wasn't really a viable or respectable way for people to circumvent the gatekeepers of the traditional publishing world. So he never had a novel published. But the idea of being a writer was always there based on my dad's experience. And in fact, my imprint, William Kingsfield Publishers, is named after my father's pen name. And so I was doing some writing, and in college I wrote some short stories, and it was great because he was my agent, so to speak. And I would turn the stories over to him, and then he did the whole sending out to all the various platforms. And so I never had to see any of the rejections. He would only tell me when a story got published. And so then many years went by where I wasn't writing at all. And in 2010, I guess it was, my husband and I were in Yellowstone. We were at the Yellowstone Hotel, also another, beautiful historic location, which probably hasn't changed at all in the last couple of generations. And I was telling him about this scene I pictured in my mind of a woman who is able to see spirits, and she has some kind of consulting gig where people can pay her to check places out and see if they're haunted. And she's at a row home, a beautiful historic row home. At the time, I was spending a lot of time in San Francisco, so I originally pictured it as being in San Francisco. And she arrives at the house, and she has such a horrible feeling that she can't even go in, and she doesn't know, but the reader knows that a murder has taken place there. So my first book, The Sense of Death, is not a mystery. It's a suspense novel, and because you see the murder happen right in the first chapters, and then the storyline is really, there's Anne Kinnear's storyline, and there's the killer's storyline. The killer's trying to get away with the murder, and their paths are converging. And is Anne going to be able to survive the convergence of their paths? So they just started out with that one scene, which was unfortunately right in the middle of the book. And so I spent 2.5 years writing scenes that led up to that scene and then writing scenes that led away from that scene, which took a lot of rewriting. So I try not to do that anymore. But that was the first book.
Was that the first? So that was the first book. Did you start with short stories and have them published other places, or did you just kind of just do short stories and getting ready to write your novels?
I had only done those short stories when I was in college, and they had nothing to do with Anne Kinnear or supernatural suspense or anything like that. I do now have some Anne Kinnear suspense shorts that I started writing basically because I had written The Sense of Death, and then the second Anne Kinnear book, which is The Sense of Reckoning. Find that here. You can see all the various iterations that my cover design has gone through. This is sort of iteration number 2, but The Sense of Reckoning is the second Anne Kinnear book. And then I had this idea for a story that I wanted to write that didn't really make sense in Anne's world. So as we've been talking about, Anne Kinnear is able to sense spirits. Everything else about her world is completely normal. It's just that she's able to sense spirits, and her brother actually runs a business where she does this consulting work where, she visits people's homes to tell them if their homes or their businesses or whatever haunted, or that's how it starts out. She can't even really communicate with spirits in the first book. She can just kind of tell whether they're benign or well-meaning or not well-meaning. And then her ability rapidly progresses over the course of the books. But I had another idea that was another one of those, let's tweak one thing and make it unusual. And so that became the first Lizzy Ballard book, which is Rock, Paper, Scissors. And there just wasn't a good way to work that into the Anne Kinnear series. And so I thought, well, I'll just write this one and then I'll get back to Anne. And so I finished that one. And then when I got to the end of that one, I realized, no, it's not a single book. It's at least 2 books. And so the second one was Snakes and Ladders. And then, and each of these was taking me 1.5 years or 2 years to write. And then I thought, no, but it's really a trilogy. So the third one was The Iron Ring. And at that point, when I started working on the second book, I thought I really have to give something to my poor Anne fans to tide them over until I get back to Anne's adventures. And so I started writing the Anne Kinnear suspense shorts to just fill in there until I got back to Anne, which I eventually did. But yeah, that I hadn't been doing short stories since college when I wrote those.
When you were in college, did you take writing classes, or did you, once you were out before you started writing, did you just kind of take writing classes to hone your craft?
I did take some writing classes in college, but and I actually did when I was working on The Sense of Death. Philadelphia author Mary Jones was teaching a class on writing suspense, and I took that, and that was a great class. That helped a lot, but I think a lot of it was just reading. I mean, I think I learned more by being a student of suspense and mysteries and thrillers by reading them than doing a long and organized study of them. And I think that's why, it wasn't until 2010 or so that I kind of had the information in my head that I needed to actually start writing books myself.
What are some of the major influences, or some of the writers who are some of the major influences on your writing?
I really like Charlene Harris. I started reading her Sookie Stackhouse books, and those obviously have a supernatural twist. And they kind of took me by surprise because I really like books where there's one little twist to reality. And when I started reading her first Sookie Stackhouse book, the premise was that vampires had been able to kind of come out into society because a company had invented a fake blood product that the vampires could drink. So they no longer had to actually, kill people. And it wasn't as good and it wasn't as like nutritious for them, but it could kind of get them by. And so they were kind of existing in society with other people now. And I thought, this is too cool. That's just a brilliant idea for a book. And then I was reading for a while, and then somebody started being able to read minds. And I thought, that's surprising. Okay. And then suddenly like werewolves started showing up. I don't even remember, all these other
Right.
supernatural things happened. And I eventually loved the books. I mean, I loved them while I was reading them, but it took me a moment to make uh, that adjustment to realize that these aren't going to be just about vampires. They're going to be kind of about the whole spectrum of supernatural beings. But what I really liked about Charlene Harris's books are her great characterizations and how she weaves in the supernatural aspects with the everyday concerns that any of us might have, along with kind of the thriller aspects of it. It's
Uh-huh.
just a great characterization. And then I'm talking this up a lot because this is my most recent favorite thing is Ben Aronovich's The Rivers of London series. And that is kind of this thing that I love where he's taken a concept and he's just twisted one thing. So it's basically a British police procedural with magic. So the premise is that magic is still out there. It's something that kind of anyone can learn if they have the right instruction. And there's this tiny shadowy part of the Met that is focused on investigating crimes that appear to have a supernatural aspect. And Peter Grant is the young protagonist who's sort of becoming the apprentice or the assistant to the head wizard of in this area, and they're just fantastic and really really brilliant uh brilliant at drawing you into the world. The descriptions of the characterization is wonderful. The descriptions of the various locations around London are wonderful. So those are a couple that I wouldn't say those were influences to me when I first started writing, because I think I read those after I had first started writing, but a
Uh-huh.
couple that I've really appreciated.
We watched this the it was called True Blood on HBO Showtime. One of those there. So we my wife and I got into those. I got lost after a little while because it just after a few seasons. But the first few seasons, anyways, were really good. So we did have a couple of the Sookie Stackhouse books. I just finished listening to one called Cursed Luck by Kelly Armstrong, and it's a YA book, a young adult book, but it's about three sisters. The middle one, or the oldest one and the youngest one, they get kidnapped. The middle one, it's kind of a mystery, where the family is from a line from the 1600s, and the witches and all that kind of stuff, but they can remove curses from objects. And so um, a an insurance salesman who himself has this power of being able to make put luck on people, but then of course he pays the price afterwards because the bad luck happens to him, but the good luck happens to his clients and stuff.
Oh, interesting.
So they're trying to get this magical necklace, this cursed necklace back, and then she's to remove the curse, but it goes up to auction, and this other person's trying to get it. He's the one who kidnapped her sisters, and she's trying to find them. Couldn't care less about the necklace, but he wants the necklace and needs. So it's kind of this twist with this curse thing where they can remove curses. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's
Um,
fascinating to see what people come up with. You would think that would have been all tapped out, but that's not a take on it that I've heard. That's really neat.
yeah. What about have you ever read Laurel K. Hamilton?
No?
Um, she's a well, she's the author, but it's Anita Blake series. Anita Blake, her profession is a necromancer. So she works for the police and the law enforcement to raise people from the dead for will disputes, murder trials, things like that. And then she puts them back on the ground after the people get their evidence. They bring juries there so that they can hear the dead person speak.
Oh
But
my gosh.
she's also a licensed vampire slayer. And so but the reason I mentioned is because you had mentioned the one where vampires are out in the open, like True Blood. They're out in the open, but so are all the weird animals. Now there's laws protecting them, but there's also laws that she can kill on sight. if need be. And so she ends up having to team up with the master vampire of St. Louis and the master werewolf of St. Louis, and they got this thing going. When these other groups try to move into the city and stuff, and things go wrong. So I was just wondering if it's really good. The first 5, 6 books are really good. There's a lot of, it gets more into the sex, because that's how she's kind of like a succubus, and that's how she rejuvenates herself, and she's got to get together. It's pretty weird, but they were really good to begin with anyways. The mystery, the crime, the thriller part of it.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I'll have to check them out.
enough of me rambling. So some of the other influences. You also belong to Sisters in Crime, the Mystery Writers of America, and the Brandywine Writers Group. Were any of those real helpful in getting your career going, or did you join them after you had started and had gotten published?
I think I certainly joined Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America after I had a book or two out, and maybe after my first book. Brandywine Valley Writers Group, I think I was a member before my book came out. And that was great because it was, just a great support group, and also great sources of information, from people who had been published through a variety of methods, from, deals with traditional publishers to small press to independently published. So that was just nice to have that community of like-minded writers in the Brandywine Valley Writers Group. And then Sisters in Crime has been a huge help to me. Among other things, the Delaware Valley Sisters in Crime branch, which is my local branch, has some of the best speakers. We've now gone to, over the last year or so, it's gone to Zoom and gone virtual, which has been kind of a plus, as this kind of interaction is illustrating that you have access to many more people than you would if you were just looking for people geographically local. And great resources for anyone who's interested in crime, both writers and readers, forensic experts and lie detector experts and bomb sniffing dogs and people who are researching what might have happened to Jack the Ripper, just, lots and lots of great resources. And then more recently, I got involved in the New England chapter of Sisters in Crime because I have two of my novels, a standalone that is still kind of in the works, and several of my short stories are based in New England. So I kind of wanted more of a connection to the New England area to reach out to people who might be interested in that based on its local setting. But yeah, I think any of those kinds of organizations can be really helpful to writers throughout their careers.
Were you a part of any other just local writers groups or national writers groups? I know pre-pandemic, you could meet in person if you did belong to them, but did you branch out to more Zoom type or online type of groups? And
Well, during the pandemic, it has been, the ones we mentioned are the ones that I've mainly been involved in over the past year or so. I used to be a member of International Thriller Writers, and in fact, I went to their Thriller Fest conference for 4 years and loved it, but it was quite a little investment because it's in New York City, and just staying there independent of the conference is expensive, but it was great. Plus I was still working my day job. So, I had a little more flexibility with finances there. And then after 4 years, I decided I was going to take a break because their conferences sort of have 4 tracks, like for each slot where there are classes or seminars or seminars or talks or whatever you want to call it. They're normally 4. So if you've been there for 4 years, it's not like you've exhausted it, but pretty soon you kind of touched on a lot of the topics that they cover. And considering how expensive it was, I was going to take some time off. And then when I left my corporate job in 2019, and I was trying to make a financial go of writing, I started being much more choosy about the organizations that I was spending money to belong to. And so I decided not to rejoin International Thriller Writers, mainly because the Lizzy Ballard books are thrillers, but they're sufficiently like, they align nicely with Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America. So I felt like I was getting the support I needed from those organizations. And also what I'm finding now is it's almost an overage of riches, because you can only go to so many of the classes or so many of the meetings. And I've actually started even thinking about scaling back on my membership a little bit more, just because I'm not really able to take advantage of all the offerings that a lot of these groups have. I'm also the member of a Maine centric writers and publishers group. And I feel bad because they just have so much. It's almost like too much. I just, I couldn't go to all the classes. I can't read all the newsletters. And after a while, I think it's almost making me more crazy.
Right.
Because I feel like I'm not taking advantage of it. I should probably just niche down on the couple that I'm very active with, and, that I've established a relationship with.
Yeah, I kind of have that with the American Booksellers Association. There's so much stuff available there, and the emails that I get constantly from them and from the regional trade group, the New England Independent Booksellers Association, it just kind of gets a little too much. And
Yeah.
I'd love to watch their online tutorials for this and how to do this and to help the business, obviously, but I'm just too busy running the business and
Yeah.
keeping up with social media and stuff.
Yeah.
So, um, what so what's when you went to some of the conferences, who was the most surprising or the most famous uh writer that you met, where you went all fanned out on them and so excited to be able to, I can't believe I'm speaking to this person?
Probably CJ Box was one of those people. I love the CJ Box books, and he was there. And it's always gratifying when there's an author that you love and they also turn out to be a super nice person. And he was definitely one of those people, just very personable. And there was one point at which everybody was, going to get everybody had bought their books at the bookshop, and now they were going to go get them signed. And somehow I ended up at the table where he was going to be sitting early, and he came and sat down, and 3 minutes later he had a huge line, but there was like a couple of minutes there where I was the only person there, so we had a nice chat. So that was very fun. Lee Child is another person who's a big figure in international thriller writers, also super gracious and nice. I just have to say that I've been fortunate that I can't think of many authors that I've met in person that I thought they were really jerks. They just seem, if they're at that kind of event, I think in general, they are looking to pay it forward to other writers. And I just think in general, there's no other industry where the people who are very successful are so committed to helping along the people who in any other industry would be considered their competitors. I think many authors, especially the ones that show up at those kinds of events, are very generous in that way. It was funny. One year I was at International Thriller Writers. George R.R. Martin was the grandmaster, whatever they call it, the head,
Right.
the head
Yep.
honoree. And but it was funny because he always had kind of a group of people around him fending off people. So he seemed like a very pleasant man, but nobody actually got to talk to him. But his comments were very interesting, and he's a great storyteller, obviously. So, but yeah, he was very protected.
Oh, I bet. My wife is a big fan of Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. They're Preston and Child books. Tess Gerritsen and CJ Box. She loves the thrillers, the Clive Cusslers and all those. I'm just getting ready to start a new audiobook, and it's the first time I have ever read or listened to a Tom Clancy novel. I'm more of a fantasy sci-fi type person, so I never really got into thrillers and stuff until I opened the bookstore. And then I've read a lot of the local authors, the ones that we're going to get into the store, of course, but never really got into those spy and thrillers and anything like that. So I'm I'm really looking forward to my first Tom Clancy.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I realize I don't think I've ever read a Tom Clancy book either, because that's not my go-to place. I did love the Preston and Child books. I went through like a phase where I just was reading nothing but the Pendergast.
Oh, she loves those too. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, those are really fun. And a similar kind of thing. I mean, that's a little more fantasy-esque, but
Right.
there's like the recognizable real world superimposed on this, the more supernatural aspects.
So supernatural aspect. Is that's what both of your series have a little touch of?
Well, certainly the Kinnear book. So, very explicitly, Anne is someone who early on can sense and then later can communicate with spirits, which opens up all sorts of um, promising suspense and mystery opportunities. The Lizzy Ballard books is a different kind of, I never know whether to say supernatural, because that does kind of suggest, ghosts, but has a paranormal aspect. There's the one tweak, and it would be a bit of a spoiler for the first book for me to say what it is, but yeah, there's both of them for both of my books and my suspense shorts. The theme is what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. So for Lizzy's, her extraordinary ability is a little bit different, but a similar kind of consequences.
Right, right. So what kind of research did you have to do other than watching or reading a lot of Sookie Stackhouse? What are the what other kind of research did you do? Did you talk to like mediums and psychics and things to get some ideas? I mean, good.
No, I didn't do any research. In fact, I didn't even read the Sookie Stackhouse books until after I had published at least the first Ann Kinnear book, because I did feel like I'm just going to make that up completely. And I felt like I didn't want to be hampered by some expert saying, this is how it works. I'm like, no, I just totally want to make that stuff up myself. Although I did do a ton of research. I'd mentioned that the Sense of Reckoning has as its backstory this fire that took place in 1947 on Mount Desert Island. The Falcon and the Owl has a backstory of a woman who's an aerobatic pilot and air racing pilot. And so I did a lot of research into that. I talked with the NTSB. So for the backstories, I do a ton of research, but for the talking with dead people, no research.
Please tell me you went to the Reno air races for some of your research for that.
I would have loved to have gone to the Reno air races. So one of the people I talked to, there were two primary pilots that I talked to about performance aviation. One of them was Matt Chapman, who's a pilot who's based actually at New Garden Flying Field, which is the actual airport that the fictional Avondale Airport. I even have a coffee mug that has Avondale Airport Falcon Flight Services. I keep trying to get all my pilot friends to buy these, because I said, don't you want to show this to someone and then have them wonder where in the world Avondale Airport is and what Falcon Flight Services is? But that's from the Falcon and the Owl. And so Matt Chapman is an aerobatic pilot that's based out of New Garden, and he was super helpful. And I got to see his super fancy plane that he flies in his performances. He flew, he's retired now, but he flew for Embry-Riddle, the sponsor of his plane. And then Vicki Bensing, who is also an aerobatic performer and an air racer. And so she was super generous with her time in talking about not only the mechanics of that, but what it's like to be a woman in those, very male dominated spaces. And she's flown at Reno. And at the time, some of the research I was doing was during the pandemic. And I had actually had lined up, I spoke to a company, a guy who runs a company that acts as an air boss for air shows, as in they're the people who do all the management of the air show. And I was going to be going to air shows and, seeing behind the scenes, and none of that happened because of the pandemic. But yeah, I would love to go to Reno and see the air races. That would be super cool.
Yeah, as an aviation buff myself, the two places that I would love to are on my bucket list is Reno to see the air races, and then Oshkosh. And as a controller, I actually, Oshkosh was on my huge bucket list to be a controller there.
Really?
Yeah, I would
Now
have
we could spend
loved
the
to.
whole rest of the time talking about that because I find that terrifying. My husband every once in a while says we should go to Oshkosh, and I'm like, no, no. I just, as a passenger, even I couldn't do it. What is that like? Because you're landing
It's
like multiple planes on the same runway, right?
well, there's different ones. There's spotters out in different locations around the field that kind of help sequence the planes, and then there's the ones up in the control tower, um, and who work the right at the airport and the ground. It's pretty wild. And a guy I worked with here in Manchester, he because he used to work at Oshkosh, he was always invited back to work there. It's an exclusive club. You have to work there. You had to have been working there before, even if you went other places like him. So yeah, I was always jealous when he came back from that because he'd have his stories and stuff. But yeah, I'd love to go to work there. But now, of course, I'd love to go there now that I'm retired. I'd love to go there to just go and watch and walk around and
Yeah.
take our
If I
camper
could
and
teleport. So this is my other, I was recently talking, not that recently, more than a year ago, I was talking with some friends and the topic came up of what would you want your superpower to be? And I said, teleporting. For this very reason, I could just show up at Oshkosh, not have to go through the terror of landing with a whole bunch of other people, only some of whom are really qualified to be doing it.
yeah, yep, yeah. He's told me some horror stories, but it'd still be exciting. So book one, The Sense of Death, the Ann Kinnear suspense novel. You started
Mhm.
telling us a little bit about it. One thing I've noticed about your book covers is they all have, or at least the first couple, have doors with door knockers on them. Of course, Falcon the Owl have the broken airplane um,
Yeah.
instruments, but the fourth one, the Furnace for Your Foe. Again, we're back to a door with a
Yep.
padlock this time instead of
Yep.
a knocker. What was the thought behind all those? And
Well, the sense of death, and this is interesting too, because you can see the images have stayed basically the same, but the the design has gotten much more sophisticated. So you can see this was an early version of the sense of death, and then the furnace for your foe. That last year I had the covers kind of rebranded, and I loved what the book cover designer did. I thought it made it look much more engaging and kind of brought it up to date. But um, so the sense of death, I think that I had just been looking for an image that I'd like to see on the cover of a book. And I came across this photograph, which I purchased, purchased the license to use. And it is sort of, it's like the door that you would see in the home where the murder takes place. It's a
hmm,
fashionable row house near Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. And it's the kind of door you can imagine might have been on that house. And then for the sense of reckoning, I can't even remember if I looked particularly for a door. And this is actually a terrible one because the way the printer cut the book, that's actually a doorknob kind of the side of the book, but
hmm,
it's not very good. The more current one is nicer. But that one takes place in an old hotel on Mount Desert Island. And in fact, if people are visitors to Mount Desert Island, you'll probably recognize that it's like a derelict version of the beautiful Claremont Hotel in Southwest Harbor. And I had gone to that hotel off season. It was before the hotel had opened, but the assistant manager was there, and it was all the beds were all pulled apart, and bare mattresses and things like that. And I walked around, and part of it takes place in the attic there. So I thought that the photograph that I found with the door with kind of the worn paint and modeled wall paint I liked, and I liked the color of it. And while I was there, we were chatting with the assistant manager, and I said, if you were gonna, this is the kind of thing you can only ask if you're an author. Or maybe you only should ask if you're an author, that if you were going to hide a body, where would you put it? And now I know the best place to hide a body in the Claremont Hotel in Southwest Harbor, Maine. You're going to have to read the book to find out where that is. But So that, I think in both cases, it was around the idea that I wanted the covers to be an architectural element, but in a very, with like a central thing that was the focus. So that might make more sense if I backtrack a little bit. When I first was finishing up The Sense of Death, I went to a book cover designer and I said, I want like an architectural element, but something that's more like a design element, but with a central thing that can be like the focus of the design. And so he went off, and pretty soon he came back, and it was this Gothic house on a hill with hands around a crystal ball in the foreground. I was like, what part of architectural element did you not understand? So we started over again. But and I think just because I like these kinds of covers, I like those ones where you're taking like one item that's meaningful to the story and you're really focusing on it. Obviously, The Falcon and the Owl, that's an obvious one, broken instrument, airplane instrument. And then I really struggled for what I wanted the designer to do with A Furnace for Your Foe. And as you had mentioned, it turned out to be the padlock on the door. And the title A Furnace for Your Foe comes from Shakespeare. All my books, the titles are based on Shakespeare quotes. And so the Shakespeare quote is from Henry VIII, and it is, "Heat not a furnace for your foe so hot that it do singe yourself." And so I went through a long time trying to think, what could I do that was really fire related, like a fire extinguisher? I don't think so. And it's almost like the padlock came up at the very last minute, because I was really running out of time to tell my cover designer what I wanted as the cover image. And I thought, I should stop thinking so literally about the fire theme and just think more generally about the storyline. And as with the other covers, the image on the cover of that book ties in well with one of the scenes in the book.
So I have the cover of your second one. See if I can get that to come up. There is The Sense of Reckoning. Do you see that?
Yeah. That's the new cover, which I like a lot better.
This is the new one.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because I do. I like that one as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about Anne Kinnear. You started talking about it a little bit. So there's a supernatural aspect to this. Do the books are the books standalone, or do they need to be read in order because things kind of, well, obviously go into the next book?
I would always encourage people to read them in order. If you discovered book 4 and then went back and read them, I mean, as with any series, if there's a book 4, you know that she survives books 1 through 3. So it's a spoiler in that sense. But I think that I would encourage people to read them in order because her ability develops over time. So in The Sense of Death, she's just sensing, getting a general sense like spirit, not spirit, benign, malign, sort of at that level. And then at the end of that book, and certainly at the beginning of the second book, her abilities progresses quite a bit. As an example, in the beginning of the second book, she actually sees a person that she doesn't realize is a spirit. So, her ability has expanded so much that it's like almost indistinguishable for her. And then, as the books progress, she's actually communicating with them. So I think it would be weird to read a later book and then go back when her ability was so basic. But you certainly could. You're not,
Right.
I think that they do stand alone. But unlike the Lizzy Ballard books, which you really do have to read in order because there's an overarching storyline that crosses all 3 books that you should really get in order.
Well, let's talk about that. What is this overarching storyline for the Lizzy Ballard books?
Well, it's sort of the consistent
Without spoiling it, of course.
Right. Yeah. I think that that in each book, Lizzy, who is very young in the first book, she's, a child, but for most of the first book, she's 16, 17 years old. There's the immediate threat that she's facing down and trying to deal with, but there's the kind of the overarching bad guy that actually morphs over time, who the overarching bad guy is, but it continues. And actually doesn't get completely wrapped up in book 3 in the sense that in the traditional sense of wrapping up a thriller. But when I was working on book 3, I was like, oh, like there can't be 4 books, I have to wrap this up in 3. And I was really pleased with how I was able to do that while still leaving the opportunity open for there to be 4, 5, and 6 down the road.
Have and your fans and readers, have they been emailing you? When are we getting number 4? When's number 4?
I think that I have more regular readers and more rabid readers for Ann Kinnear, so I get more requests for when the next Ann book is than the next Lizzy book. But all these people do. I mean, the characters in the books do become like friends, and I am kind of getting to the point where I'm missing Lizzy and her allies. So yeah, if I were to be able to plan this out completely by my preferences, I would say there would be Anne books 5 and 6, and then I would probably go back to Lizzy.
So with the Lizzy ones, where she starts off at about 16, 17 years old, would you consider them young adults, or young adult crossover, or just strictly sort of as far as where they would be sort of put on the shelf in a bookstore? Would they be in the adult supernatural, paranormal, suspense, crime, or could they be put in the young adult section?
I think that they were definitely written as adult. And although I certainly believe that teenagers could read and enjoy them, um, they're not really young adult. Like, I think that there's a whole expectation around the structure and the characterization and the messages that are carried in YA books that these books may or may not comply with, but they weren't written for that specifically. So, I always present them as adult books, although I do know that that I do have teenage readers. And at one time I would have said, there's no sex and there's very little profanity in the Lizzy books, and there's a certain amount of violence. But then you read something like The Hunger Games, and you're like, yeah, pretty much anything goes with violence. It's not as violent as The Hunger Games. So yeah, it would be interesting. I would love to. Well, you probably have a good sense of this, being a bookstore person, that um, they're like the tropes that you need to make sure that you've baked into YA books, that if you haven't, they don't really count. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, kind of. Um, there's a lot of young adult books that I just absolutely loved, and some adult books, or adult, quote unquote, adult books, that I think some older 17, 18, young adults would love as well. But there's some great even middle grade books, because I do a lot of listening to audiobooks to see what I want to get for the stores. And um, there's a lot of like uh, um, the Dogman books. They're hilarious.
I don't know those.
They're actually middle grade graphic novels. There's the Max Einstein. It's a James Patterson collaboration with the author of the Max Einstein books. I can't remember. It's Christopher something, I think. Um, but they're just wonderful, fun books to read. If you want something light. Um, but then there's the Hunger Games, which is definitely darker, but it's teenagers, and young adults, and young kids too, that are portrayed in these books. How graphic do your books get?
Well, I would say that the ending confrontation of the Lizzy books is probably as violent or as graphic as I get, and it's it's the fear of what might happen, not um, not to spoil it for anyone who's looking forward to a lot of violence, but the threat of what might happen rather than what actually pans out to happen. So, but I think that sometimes the threat of what might happen is even more frightening than,
Uh-huh.
if you're explicit about showing everything. So I never know how to answer that, especially every once in a while I would be at a book fair, and I'd have a parent come by with their kid of some age, and they would ask if I thought a young person could read my books. And I was never quite sure how to answer that because people's scales are so different. And I was speaking to someone who writes YA books. I have a podcast called the Indie Author Podcast, and I was speaking to an author, and we were talking about this, and she said, I always just say, why don't you parent read the book first and then and then make a decision? Because people's way of judging that are so different. How do you handle that when a parent comes to you and asks you that question about a book in your store?
This the same way. I ask, what do they like to? What had they read before? What are some of the movies that they really like? And then, um, you know, based on what they've watched or what they've read, I can tell how, you know, something complementary to or comparative to that.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting when I was finding ways to promote The Sense of Death. I submitted to the Fussy Librarian. Have you heard of the Fussy Librarian? So it's sort of like a smaller version of BookBub. So, many viewers and listeners will probably be familiar with BookBub, where you as a reader subscribe to an email, and then you say, I like thrillers and mysteries. And then every day you get an email that has thrillers and mysteries that are on sale. So the Fussy Librarian is kind of similar, except their spin on it is you rank the books by language, violence, sex. I forget what, probably those are the primary ones. And so I was filling out the form, and it said like, no profanity, mild profanity, extensive profanity. I guess most of the divisions were 3. So I said, oh, mild profanity, although I couldn't find a definition of how they were defining those 3 things. So I sent the book in, and then I thought there's got to be a definition somewhere. They can't just be totally leaving this up to the authors to decide. So I fished around somewhere on the website, and I found the definition. And the definition of mild was you can drop the F-bomb once, and after that it was extreme. So I said, oh, that's interesting. So I did a word count of how many times I dropped the F-bomb. And it was like 17, because I'm sorry, one of the characters in The Sense of Death just swears a lot. He's just that kind of guy. And so I had to write back, and I said, okay, I have to go with extensive profanity. Does that mean I can't be part of the promotion? They said, no, that was fine. As long as you're accurate in your portrayal of it, it's not like they're trying to weed out those. But yeah, it's very hard sometimes to judge your own work about where other people would rate it on those kinds of scales.
That's what I was thinking with the profanity anyways, is the low end is the damn and hell, and then the F-bombs, and then how many would be on the more extreme end. So it's almost kind of like a PG rating.
Yeah.
A PG rating in a movie, I think you can get away with 1 F-bomb in a PG movie. Anything above that goes into the R category, and then NC-17 or whatever else the things are. So what are some of the mysteries in the or the crimes in the Lizzy, or I'm sorry, the Ann Kinnear books? Are they all separate crimes in each book, or?
Yes. So it's interesting because when I wrote The Sense of Death, as I said, there's a murder, but it happens very early on, right in front of the reader. And so the suspense is the guy going to get away with it? And what's going to happen with Anne in the process of him trying to do that? And then in The Sense of Reckoning, which is the second book, there is another death that has mysterious qualities to it. So it's starting to be more of a mystery, but it's still more a mystery about something odd is going on at this creepy old hotel. What is it? And what are the consequences going to be? And I can't really say more than that because it would be a spoiler. But the second 2 and the one that I'm working on now, I mean, the third and the fourth one and the one I'm working on now are true mysteries, that there's it's a true whodunit mystery. Although at the beginning of The Falcon and the Owl, there's a murder that happens right in front of the reader on the page. So that's kind of a combination, that there's that murder that you know about, but then there's something else going on, and it turns out to be more of a whodunit. So it's interesting because I think that I should probably have bookstores filing the first two under suspense and 3 through 5 under mystery. But of course, you want people to read through. And I have to say, I don't know that I have ever read a reader review, where they commented on a different approach. I just think that it's the consistency is, it's circumstances where being able to talk to a dead person is important, or that trying to avoid a dead person is important, depending on the particular plot twist. And that seems to provide enough consistency that people aren't saying, wait, suddenly it's a whodunit.
And that's what I was thinking, is the consistency of the main characters, and their progress, their growth throughout the series, or in their backsliding, their backstory, things like that. Not necessarily the mystery or the crime
Yeah,
itself.
I think that's true. Yeah.
So what about the Lizzy Ballard?
So with Lizzy, it starts out when she's very young, and Lizzy has grown up, unbeknownst to her family. When her mother got pregnant, her mother gets pregnant through the auspices of a fertility clinic, and the fertility clinic was basically experimenting on the babies that were conceived as a result of their treatments. And so Lizzy is born with this ability that then the fertility clinic expects to be able to take advantage of as the children grow up. And so it takes a little while for her parents to realize what's going on. And then when they do, they realize that Lizzy is kind of a hazard to the people around her. And it was very interesting because in the Anne Kinnear books, Anne is a woman who, it could be out and about. She's not posing a hazard to anybody, but she is sort of reclusive, especially at the beginning, because she's had bad experiences of people hearing that she can communicate with dead people and thinking that she's crazy, or she's a liar, or she's a charlatan. And in fact, she had an important relationship that ended because this person didn't really believe she could do what she could do. And so she surrounded herself with this small, close-knit group of people, her brother-in-law, a couple that sort of serve as surrogate parents for her. And through the course of the series, she gets more out there and taking a more active role in the world around her. Whereas Lizzy, I think, would love to be out there in the world. She's totally sociable, loves to be with people, but she really shouldn't be. And her desire to connect with people is what leads her into a lot of the difficult situations she encounters. And so in the first book, it's basically, is Lizzy going to avoid becoming the lab rat for the people who had made her what she is today? And then the following books sort of pursue that same theme while adding some others in. And that was an interesting one from the point of view of the challenges that the character faces, because it becomes sort of, it's very personal at the beginning. I mean, Lizzy and her allies are trying to stay alive. It's their own health and well-being that's, in danger. But then in the third book, it's becoming more a matter of Lizzy is, now a 17-year-old being asked to do things as a result of her ability, and her having to wrestle with the morality of what do you do when you are in a position where you can bring harm to other people. And the bad guy characters in the first two books, well, one of the bad guy characters is just one of my favorite characters of all, even though they're the bad guy. But there's one terrible bad guy in the third book, and I had to make a character who is almost like a caricature of evil in order to highlight this difficult moral dilemma that Lizzy finds herself in. But I am a big believer that you need to have the good guys have some flaws, and you need to have the bad guys have some appealing qualities. And that made one of the bad guys in Lizzy books one of my favorites.
When you developed your characters, Lizzy and Anne, were they kind of, well, actually, let me start by saying this. With Anne, it kind of sounds like the X-Men character Rogue.
That's another one I haven't seen. Or
Is it? Let me make sure on that one, but I think it's Rogue. Where, well, it's Anna Paquin played her character
okay,
in the movies, but she couldn't touch people because if she touched people, she killed people. So she always had to wear gloves, and she ends up
yeah,
falling in love with one of the other X-Men teens. She's a teen, but she can't touch them, and but that kind of sounds like that moral dilemma where she has these powers. They need to be used for the greater good,
yeah,
but her, the ability that she has will kill people.
yeah, yeah. That's very much like the Lizzy premise.
So back to my other question there. So when you developed Lizzy and Anne, did you kind of model them after somebody as far as the characteristics other than the supernatural parts, or was it sort of an amalgamation of people that you've seen on the streets or in the library or a theater or a restaurant or something? Like, oh, I like the way that person walks. I like that person's hair. I like that, and then kind of put it all together to come up with their characters.
Well, I have to say that Anne is the character that's most like me. So if I were younger, thinner, and could see dead people, that would be me. So an ongoing joke in the Anne Kinnear books is that um, Anne looks like her clothes were always sourced from LL Bean. And there's a scene that I had some fun with in The Falcon and the Owl, where Gwen Burridge, who is the air racing an air show pilot, she's a performer, and she's all about the performance. And she has, her branded color scheme on her plane, and her flight suit, matches it. And even when she's out and about, her clothing that she wears just every day complies with the same branding. And there's an interesting scene. There's kind of a sub theme of The Falcon and the Owl about the pros and cons of celebrity. So Gwen's position is, you're a performer, you have fans, you owe it to your fans to give them a good performance. And Anne's position is, I'm not a performer, I'm a professional. I don't have to give anybody a performance. And there's a scene that I had fun with where Gwen is researching one of Anne's colleagues, her sometimes colleague, sometimes competitor, Garrick Mazur. And she looks up, he has a website that only has one page, because why would anyone need more than one page on their website? And he has longish black hair and bushy black eyebrows, and a black t-shirt, and a black jacket. When you see him, in person, he's wearing black boots and black pants. He just always wears all black. And he also never he never eats anything or drinks anything other than bread and water when he's in public. And so Gwen is kind of like approving. She's like, he obviously has this brand thing going. And she said, it's an easier look for a man to pull off than for a woman, but Anne Kinnear wasn't doing herself any favors by wearing a wardrobe that looked like it was sourced exclusively from LL Bean. And so I've put a reference to that in all the books. But yeah, I think the way Anne reacts to things is largely the way I would react to them if I were in her position. And it was interesting because I had several readers say that after the first book, one of the things they wished they knew more about was Anne. That they felt like they knew the other characters quite well, but they would like to know Anne better. And so I think that the reason that it panned out that way is that I was kind of writing myself, and it all seemed very obvious, and I didn't feel the same drive to flesh out Anne's character until I heard that input. And then I've fixed that in the subsequent books. Whereas I think Lizzy is more the person that I would like to be, except minus the dangerous power. She's very sociable. She's very, she's she loves colorful clothes, so she'll wear these colorful, perhaps not very matching, but very bright, colorful clothes. She likes doing weird things with her hair. And one thing that I really admire about Lizzy is that she's someone who, if something needs to be done, she goes about trying to do it. And she's never put off by the fact that, oh, you're only 17, or, you can't know how to do that. She's like, okay, well, I'm going to look at a video on YouTube and I'll figure out how to do it. And so I think that Anne is more like me and Lizzy is more like the me I'd like it to be. And then the characters around them, with a couple of exceptions, mainly for the more minor secondary characters where I thought, oh, that's just like so-and-so. They generally weren't based on people I knew or had seen around. They were just creations of my imagination.
So you said one of the bad guys was your favorite character. With such a favorite character, are there characters that you do like, that you thought came out really well, but you knew eventually they would have to be killed off and were kind of upset about that? And then on the other side of that, is there a character that you really didn't think it came out well, but was kind of maybe whiny or just obnoxious, and it was just a real stupid character, and so it's supposed to be just a one-off in whichever book they first appeared in, but then you find that you kind of have to write them in subsequent books at different times, and you can't kill them off.
Yeah. The character that springs to mind is that there's a character in The Falcon and the Owl in the first, I won't say a draft of it, but let's say it was a very thorough outline. I was trying to, now that I'm trying to make a living at this, I'm always trying to find ways to eliminate the wasted time of writing a novel. And so what I found with the first one was I wasted a ton of time because I wasn't doing any outlining. I was just writing chapters, and then I would think, oh, there's a cooler thing I could do. And then I'd have to trash 10 chapters and rewrite them. And it was fine because I was kind of doing it as a hobby, and it wasn't like I was under any kind of deadline. But I'm trying to be more diligent about having quite a thorough outline before I jump in and start writing. And so I had written this outline and I gave it to my editor, and, he said, this seems fine, but I think you really have to make the bad guy worse to make it plausible that they do what they do at the end. And we batted around some ideas of, nefarious things that this character could do. And I finally just said, I just don't see that person doing that. I think that's not the bad guy after all. And I ended up having to rewrite the outline to make a different person the bad guy, because the character, it was another thing where at that point I really liked that character. And he would say, well, maybe the character does this kind of dishonorable thing. And I was like, I don't think so. So that was one where, I changed the story so that, and that character also died at the end of my original outline. I was like, I don't want that character to die, so I avoided that. And I don't know that there are any annoying characters that anyone has said, oh, you have to bring this character back. They're usually all of them are annoying at one point or another. They're just like normal people, so they're all annoying once in a while. But the ones that are truly intentionally annoying were ones that I knew I was going to only have to deal with. Whatever plot device they were being used for, I was only going to have to use them for that. And I can't imagine anyone asking to have those characters brought back, or, oh, I really miss so-and-so, can we have him again? No, you can't, because I just don't want to deal with that person anymore. So I think I've been able to work around, those two scenarios that you described.
Yeah. A few days ago, or maybe it was last week, one of the authors, I asked that question, and he said, yeah, there was this newspaper reporter, just kind of a sort of a Clark Kent type of real nerdy and whiny and obnoxious, but klutzy, whatever. And it was supposed to be just a one-off, but then he realized a couple books later, you know what, that character would really fit right here. And so he
That was
had
Bruce,
him.
right? Bruce Coffin?
I think it was, maybe it was, yeah.
Yeah. Billingsley, or I can't quite
Yes,
remember what the
yes.
character's name was, but something
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So it had, it fit. Have you ever had any readers or your fans surprise you with either they didn't like a character that you really liked and thought you did a really good job developing, and the other one they hated a character, or they hated a character you loved writing in, and they loved a character that you really didn't put a lot of time in. It's a good character, but like you said, it's not going to come back up again.
The the bad guy character from Lizzy, people are surprised that I'm so fond of that character. And it's always an interesting conversation, like at book clubs. I love doing book clubs. If anyone is listening to this and they would like to do a virtual book club for one of my books, I would love to do it, because it's like the best market research to hear what people are talking about. So people are always surprised that I'm so fond of the bad guy in the Lizzy Ballard books. But what I think is funniest is hearing who they think Anne Kinnear should date. And I never read romance, and I would be very bad at writing romance. So poor Anne has gone now for 4 books, and she actually hasn't been on a date. And so I was talking with another, having a conversation like this, and I was telling them that, after 4 books, well, in the 4th book, A Furnace for Your Foe, it's kind of clear that I'm setting up that that there's a character that has a romantic interest in Anne. And I kind of have to pay it off in the 5th book. She has to go on a date with him. Okay. So I'm working on that now in my own way, trying to pay off that promise I've made in book 4. But it was always uproariously funny to hear people talk about who they thought Anne should date, and sometimes they would get into arguments about it, which was even funnier. And there was, but it was interesting because it made me realize that different people had pictured the characters very differently. So one of the characters, it was clear that they pictured him being younger than I pictured him as being. And I don't know that I ever specified how old he was. And so, they were thinking he was kind of in the running for being the guy that Anne was going to date. And it's very informative to hear what people are bringing from that. I think some of it was that a lot of the people who were reading it were probably used to reading books that there was almost always a romantic element of it. And so they were kind of trying to provide the romantic element where it wasn't there. But yeah, those conversations about who Anne should date are the ones that have been most surprising to me.
So with your settings, we know that some of them take place in Pennsylvania, a little bit takes place in Sedona, some take place in Mount Desert Island. You had mentioned Yellowstone a long ways back. That's another historical place. You ever think of writing Yellowstone into one of your books as a setting?
I would love to. I'd be a little bit hesitant to be stepping on Nevada bar territory with the Anna Pigeon books, and how that they're all based in national parks.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever read them, but that actually was an influence on me, and books that I read and really enjoyed before I started working on the Ann Kinnear books. And so I'm sure that Nevada Bar has done Yellowstone, and I'd be a little leery of retracing that ground. But I really like writing. I prefer to write in a fewer number of areas and explore them more deeply than to try to hit too many different areas. So the first and the third and now the 5th books of the Ann Kinnear series are set around Philadelphia, Wilmington, Delaware, Southeast Pennsylvania, a little side trip to the shore. And I really like that. And I even like being able to reference either real or fictional places across books. And in fact, here's another little teaser for the people who are listening. There's a cameo of 2 unnamed characters from the Ann Kinnear books in one of the Lizzy Ballard books in a well-known location in Philadelphia. And if anyone can tell me who they are, there's a Friends of Ann Kinnear mug in it for them. I've thrown that out several times and I've never had the person guess it. But as an example, when I was writing the Lizzy Ballard books, I wanted one of the characters teaches at a university, and I went to Penn, and it's very clearly Penn. I mean, if you know Penn at all, the university I'm describing is very clearly Penn, but I didn't want to call it Penn because at the time I was writing it, I didn't know if eventually something nefarious would happen at Penn. They would have like some illegal activity going on. So it became William Penn University. And so I'm sure that if it hasn't already, William Penn University is going to make an appearance in the Ann Kinnear books, because I like that idea of creating a world and being able to cross-populate it a little bit, even if they're not explicit storyline connections. So I think it's probably mainly still going to be Maine and the Philadelphia area for the settings of Anne. And then I have no idea what I'm going to be doing with Lizzy in the next set of 3.
Would you be willing to think about maybe changing the name of Yellowstone to something else, but having the description clearly if somebody's been there? Say this is, you know what, that sounds a lot like Yellowstone.
Yeah, it is so distinctive, though. I think it would almost be like describing you went to Philadelphia and you saw the big bell and it was called the Bell of Freedom. Like at some point renaming it becomes more distracting than helpful. So I don't know. I would be more likely to write a story and just explicitly have it be Yellowstone, I think, than try to change that.
So you mentioned that you do outlines, so that answers one of my questions. One of my things is a plotter versus a pantser thing. You do the outline.
Yeah.
When you're done writing, how many times do you go through edits, and then do you use beta readers after that, or while you're writing? Do you write a section like, say, the air races and the aeronautics thing? Did you give it to those people that you spoke to read it over and see if you got things portrayed correctly?
Yeah, I definitely do that last thing. Whenever the subject matter experts are willing to give it a read, I definitely do that. When I was working on The Sense of Reckoning, which had the Fire of 47 as the backstory, I was fortunate to have a historian from MDI, Sean Cox, who actually had done a lot of research into the fire himself, who read that for me, and that was very helpful. I am very lucky to have, I do daily writing sprints, almost daily writing sprints with 2 fellow crime fiction authors, Jane Kelly and Lisa Reagan. And they have been great. Like, as an example, I just met with Jane and I basically read her the outline as it stood now for Ann Kinnear 5. And then she was asking me questions like, well, why is that character doing that? And, is there a relationship between those 2 characters? And it was great because I think I probably would have unearthed those, or asked myself those questions eventually, but she saved me weeks, if not months, of time thrashing through that. So having someone who's knowledgeable about the genre and who's a talented writer, and having them there to use as a sounding board is invaluable. And my approach has really been that I do an outline, and then I basically just keep sweeping through and fleshing it out and fleshing it out and fleshing it out. So pretty soon it is transformed from, a very sketchy outline through a very detailed outline to a sketchy manuscript to a fully fleshed out manuscript. So I'm reading it. I don't know. I mean, some of the chapters I'm sure I read and refine dozens of times. And I've always been astounded at people who could basically, I sit down and I think Bruce might have even said this. I edit what I wrote the day before and then I write the next scene. And I'm just like, oh man, bless your heart, more power to you. I can't even imagine. So
We have one writer author back in December for our horror writers Zoom thing that we did, and he does it almost by paragraph. He goes back and he writes like a paragraph, and then he goes back and reads it to make sure the words are correct. The words the word flow, I think is what he termed it, is, sounds good, and then he'll move on and keep going.
Well, I think that the reason, I mean, there must be some kind of mental process that is beyond me going on, because what I find is that if and using Kinnear 5 as an example, I wrote it, let's say, with two characters. So here's an actual example. I wrote a character who's very ill and they have a caregiver. Fine. They've hired somebody from the local caregiver thing. Then on a further read, discussion and consideration myself, I thought, oh, it's going to be much better if the caregiver is a relative. Let's make the caregiver this character's sister. And in fact, let's make her his twin. And then in the conversation I was just describing with Jane, I thought, oh, you know what's going to be even better is if she's the older sister. That's actually going to serve several plot points by making her the older sister. And I just can't imagine, like, in the past, I would have written all those scenes with the caregiver as the hired help, and then had to go back and rewrite them all as the twin sister, and then go back and rewrite them all. And it's ridiculously inefficient. But I think that the improvement in the story from its hired help to it's the twin sister to its older sister is significant enough that I wouldn't want to just say, oh, it's too much trouble, I'm just going to leave it that way. So it's only by doing that outlining process that I can find those ways that this would be cooler things in the story that I can use to improve the experience for the reader.
From idea to outline to full manuscript, all the edits, when you're ready to pass it on to the publisher for their portion of it, how long does it take you to write a book?
Well, I'm aiming for 6 months. So I'd have to check to make sure that I'm saying the dates right. So the Falcon, A Furnace for Your Foe came out in April. The Falcon and the Owl, the previous one, had come out in October. My goal is to have books out every April and October. So there's some overlap there because I started book 5 while book 4 was still like in the final stages of preparing for the launch. So, it's time shifted back maybe a month or two, but yeah, that's my goal. And, if you want to do this as a living, then I can no longer afford to spend 2.5 years on a book as I did on my first one. And so efficiency is important. Efficiency in a way that is going to give the reader an experience that is going to make them enthusiastic about going on to the next book.
You mentioned that your readers thought that some of your characters were different than what you thought they would be, like the age and things like that. So this is kind of the fun part in the last few minutes that we have left. If you could have any character, any actor or actress portray your characters on the big screen, small screen, they came to you and said, look, we want to put this out into the real world, and you got to choose, who would the actor or actresses be for, well, the actresses for Lizzy and Anne, and then the other major characters?
Oh man, that's so hard. For Lizzy, I'm going to excuse myself on that one because I have no idea who the teenage actresses are these days. And I think for Lizzy, actually, it could be, I don't have such a strong sense of her having like very particular physical characteristics, that as long as there was a teenage actor who could portray her personality the way I picture it, I probably be open to all sorts of people. I don't know. I'm almost hesitant because I've had the experience before of having people, having other authors say, oh, I pictured so-and-so for this. And I'm like, la, 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 la. I didn't want to hear that because, I pictured something very different. And then when I hear, oh, I thought it would be Zsa Zsa Gabor or whatever. And I'm like, I never wanted to hear that because now it's ruined the picture that I had in my mind of that character. So I know this is kind of a Weasley answer, but in some cases I do know, but I don't want to say. And then in other cases, I'm just like, I don't know. There could be any number of people who I think could do a good job. Although I'll just throw out, because he's a little bit of an outlier, that Garrick Mazur, who is Anne's sometimes competitor, sometimes mentor from Maine, when the audiobook was done, the narrator of the Anne Kinnear audiobooks was more of a reader, whereas the an audiobook narrator of the Lizzy books is more of a performer. So she does voices and, accents and things like that. And both of them are fine. But when the Anne narrator was narrating Garrick's parts, I was like, oh no, you don't have to do a distinctive voice for anybody else, but you have to do a distinctive voice for Garrick. And imagine Saruman except with an American accent, because I picture like Christopher Lee would actually be a really good Garrick Mazer if you could,
Okay.
if he was younger, his hair was black, and he spoke with an American accent. So I'll throw that out, that if a younger Christopher Lee is available to play Garrick Mazer, then I would jump on that.
Well, when you had mentioned you have a picture in your mind, but you don't want to ruin it, and with I kind of had that with Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, or his Robert Langdon character. I always pictured like Liam Neeson as the with the tweed coat, patches on the arms, tall, sort of the soft but kind of gruff sort of voice. Not Tom Hanks, who's just out there, bold voice and more animated and stuff. So that when I saw that kind of
I haven't
didn't
seen
work
that
for
movie,
me.
but that surprised me. I'm like, Tom Hanks, really? I wouldn't have pictured that either.
Yeah. So you mentioned audiobooks, so this is kind of be the final thing. I noticed that the Falcon and the Owl is on our favorite book audiobook company, Libro.fm. Any idea of bringing the other ones over to there?
Yes. So for people who are interested, for many years, Amazon, through their audiobook arm, ACX, was pretty much the only game in town. And I did the first 3 Anne Kinnear books and the Lizzy Ballard books through ACX. And then when the Falcon and the Owl came out, I did that is available on Audible and the Amazon platforms, but it's available other places too, as you're pointing out. So I did get away from the Amazon world in terms of production for that one. And then the fourth Anne Kinnear book, A Furnace for Your Foe, will be out later this year, also wide. And then as I get my rights back to the earlier books, then I will be putting them out on more platforms like you're talking about.
Good. Yeah, Libro FM, because we can definitely we'll definitely promote the heck out of your books
That's great.
on those, because anything through our link to them, we get a portion of the sales back, be it the membership or the a la carte purchases, and they're just a great company to work with, because first and foremost, they're not the evil river.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Now we do have an ebook company too that we work with, called Hummingbird Digital Media. Their platform is called My Must Reads, is the name of their app. But so there's that. But one thing that I really like, and and it's really appreciated too, not just from me, but I'm willing to bet from all the other bookstores too, is on your website, which we'll plug here, is mattydalrymple.com.
Yep.
All your books, they link to the standard ones, but they also link to bookshop.org, which we're very appreciative of. Same thing, they do
Yep.
help us. They've been a huge supporter of us through this whole pandemic thing. A lot of, I think, the bookstores, including mine, would not have survived without their help, because they went into it before the pandemic started, but then they upped their game when it started hitting. They saw us starting to hurt, so the portion that they upped the percentage that they gave to us, and then they're going to keep it that way, because they're doing so well
That's great.
themselves, so
Yeah.
that they've got a European um, uh, platform over there as well, so they're really doing really well. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much for ending this week, but being a part of our Mystery Writers, May is for Mystery Writers series.
Thank
And
you. This was so much fun.
good. And like I said, Libro FM for the Falcon and the Owl, and that one is just recently out, and we'll hope to get some of these books in the store. But again, for now, bookshop.org, either through our link, go directly to Bookshop. You can pick the store that you prefer or want to support. You can get them through Matty, or give us a call. We'll order it. Same with your local bookstore too. Go to your local bookstore and ask for them. Thank you very much, and
Thank you.
Hope you have a good rest of your night. And if you're ever in the area, give me a call, and we'll have you come into the store.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. This was fun.